It began in the dying winter of 1944. Snow drifted over a frozen forest on the outskirts of Krakow, Poland. The front line shifting daily, every road filled with retreating convoys and smoldering wrecks. But among those ruins, a single radio transmission cut through the static. Unidentified craft recovered. Metallic composition unknown. Request immediate scientific detachment. By morning, a convoy of black-painted trucks from the Heereswaffenamt, Germany's secret weapons office, rolled toward the site. Inside one of them sat Dr. Hans Ritter, a propulsion engineer recently transferred from Peenemünde. He had designed jet turbines for the Me-262, but what he was about to see would make that look primitive. The wreck lay half buried in snow and clay, smooth metal, seamless, like liquid steel hardened in mid-air. No rivets, no welds, not a trace of conventional engineering. Ritter's first thought was, "It's British." His second thought, "But not possible." The soldiers who first found it were ordered to remain silent. One whispered that the thing had fallen from the sky with no explosion, only a low-frequency hum that stopped their wristwatches. When engineers tried to cut into the hull, their torches sputtered out. The metal simply refused to melt. The Gestapo classified the entire site under Sonderobjekt 93. Ritter wrote in his report, "Compositions suggest metallurgical processes not achievable with our current smelting technology. The object may have resisted re-entry temperatures exceeding 2000 degrees Celsius." A week later, the fragment was transported to a bunker outside Thuringia, deep within the Harz Mountains. The same network later used for the V-2 rocket program. The scientists assigned were hand-picked, veterans of the V-Weapons Division, physicists from Göttingen, and materials experts from IG Farben. They began with the outer shell. Under the microscope, its grain structure seemed alien, molecularly aligned like magnetic crystals. When exposed to current, it emitted faint radiation but no heat. One physicist compared it to controlled energy storage without combustion. Another called it simply impossible. Then came the inner mechanism. Inside, they found what looked like a miniature turbine. No fuel lines, no exhaust ports, no moving pistons. Yet when placed near an induction field, it began to vibrate. Instruments detected pulses of unknown frequency, consistent, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The project's code name was changed to Schwarze Sonne, Black Sun. By February 1945, the Reich was collapsing, yet deep in that mountain laboratory, something extraordinary was taking shape. Ritter and his colleagues attempted to reverse engineer the power source. Their early calculations estimated its energy output could exceed 40,000 horsepower, more than any piston or jet engine of the era. But there was no combustion, no oxidizer, no fuel at all. It seemed to draw energy from electromagnetic resonance, as if feeding from the Earth itself. One scientist, Dr. Weber, wrote in his diary, "If this is truly terrestrial, we are centuries behind whoever built it." The weapon component itself, a directional emitter resembling a dish, was even more baffling. When powered, it produced no visible beam, but within seconds, instruments failed, compasses spun, and nearby radio receivers dissolved into static. The effect radius, nearly 300 meters. It was not destructive in the traditional sense, no explosion, no fire, yet it rendered all electronic and magnetic systems useless. To men used to tanks and bullets, this was sorcery. In March, an SS officer named Oberst Reinhardt arrived with new orders. "Complete your findings. Prepare for relocation. The Führer has taken personal interest." The tone in his voice suggested that failure was not an option. Ritter, exhausted, stared at the strange turbine spinning silently under a glass dome. "We shouldn't be doing this," he whispered to Weber. "It doesn't belong here."
Weber replied. "It doesn't belong anywhere." Days later, Allied reconnaissance photographed the mountain facility. Within 2 weeks, Operation Harborage was launched, an American mission to capture German scientific assets before the Soviets did. But before the Allies reached Thuringia, the site was evacuated. Trucks left under cover of fog, their cargo sealed in steel containers. By April 9th, the war was lost, and so was the weapon. When American forces finally entered the complex, they found empty laboratories, dismantled generators, and one shattered metal fragment embedded in concrete, still warm to the touch weeks later. American intelligence listed it as experimental power conversion device, purpose unknown. It disappeared into the archives of Operation Paperclip, never officially mentioned again. But among the captured German scientists, one name stood out: Dr. Hans Ritter. When interrogated, he admitted something the Americans didn't expect. "We didn't build it," he said quietly. "We only tried to understand it." When asked who did, Ritter paused. And then he said, "If I told you, you wouldn't believe me."
By the summer of 1946, the remnants of Germany's secretive mountain facility had been transported across the Atlantic under the auspices of Operation Paperclip. Among the crates of captured V-2 engines, jet turbines, and radar components was a single heavily reinforced container labeled Recovered Asset Schwarze Sonne. Inside was the fragment the German engineers had called impossible. To American scientists, it was nothing short of alien. At Wright Field, Ohio, a team of electrical engineers and physicists began careful examination. Dr. Samuel Harding, a veteran of the Manhattan Project, led the effort. "At first glance," he wrote in his report, "we assumed this was a propulsion unit, but no fuel line, no combustion chamber, no moving pistons. It operates entirely on magnetic resonance." Tests began in August 1946. When a low-voltage current was applied, the turbine inside the fragment vibrated at thousands of pulses per second. Instruments began to spike erratically. Voltmeters, magnetometers, even nearby radio receivers emitted static. No one in the room could explain the readings. Dr. Harding noted in his journal, "It draws energy in a way we cannot yet quantify. It appears to sustain itself indefinitely. It is as if the Earth itself is the fuel source." Word of the discovery reached General George Kenney, commander of the U.S. Air Force's Technical Division. He visited the lab personally in September. "If this works," he said, his voice tight with disbelief, "it could change every aircraft we've ever built." Yet no one dared test it at full capacity. The risk of uncontrollable electromagnetic discharge was too great. Meanwhile, captured German documentation surfaced, offering clues that were as puzzling as they were alarming. Reports from Dr. Hans Ritter, sent to the Reich's High Command in February 1945, described a power unit without conventional energy input, capable of rendering electronic devices inoperable within a 300-meter radius. American scientists replicated the test environment. When the fragment was powered, nearby machinery, typewriters, generators, and even early radar sets failed instantly. A small compass needle spun violently, unmoored from magnetic north. The air seemed to shimmer faintly above the turbine, as if it were generating a heatless distortion. For weeks, the research team debated the physics behind it. Some suggested it was a primitive electromagnetic pulse device. Others theorized it was an advanced form of plasma propulsion, but no known theory could fully explain the mechanism. One young engineer, Thomas Caldwell, whispered to a colleague, "It's like the Germans found something the universe didn't want us to touch." By late 1946, the U.S. Air Technical Intelligence Command issued a classified memo recommending extreme secrecy. The fragment was relocated to a hidden hangar at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where it was housed in a Faraday cage surrounded by lead-lined walls. Only a handful of scientists were allowed access, and all test results were classified top secret. The experiments yielded one undeniable fact. The weapon was more than a military device. It was a technology decades ahead of the 1940s, one that could have made the war entirely different had it been fully developed.
American engineers marveled at its efficiency. Energy output far exceeding any conventional turbine. No fuel consumption, near perfect stability under extreme stress. Speculation ran rampant. Could the Germans have fully understood it if the war had lasted another year? Or was it intentionally left incomplete? Dr. Harding's final report in early 1947 hinted at a more disturbing possibility. It is not merely a weapon, it is a glimpse into future propulsion and energy systems, concepts that we are only now beginning to comprehend. Whispers in the corridor suggested the fragment influenced early Cold War projects. Some credit it indirectly with guiding research into plasma jets, ion propulsion, and even high-frequency electromagnetic pulse devices. Though classified for decades, traces of its principles appear in experimental aircraft designs from the 1950s onward. In 1948, retired German scientists, debriefed by U.S. authorities, provided chilling testimony. Ritter admitted that during the war, they had attempted to create a full-scale version. The prototypes were unstable. They could melt metal from the inside without touching it, generate intense electromagnetic interference, and spin turbines without visible energy input. It was both impossible and terrifying. The Reich had abandoned it not because of Allied bombing, but because they feared the weapon might destroy their own laboratories. The Americans, however, were fascinated. By 1949, small-scale models of the Schwarze Sonne fragment were tested under controlled conditions. When powered, a miniature turbine produced sustained thrust in a vacuum chamber with no combustion, no fuel, no apparent external energy source. It was the first step towards technologies that would not fully mature for decades. Still, despite repeated experiments, some effects could not be contained. Sparks danced unpredictably, magnetic fields fluctuated wildly, and instruments sometimes shattered. One technician wrote in a log, "It is alive in a sense. It does what it wants. We can only guide it, never control it fully." Over time, most of the fragments were dispersed into top-secret research programs. Some were sent to Langley Research Center, others to the newly formed U.S. Air Force's Advanced Research Division. The full scope of what Schwarze Sonne could have done remained buried. Classified memos hinted at propulsion possibilities, energy weapons, and even early concepts of stealth technology, all inspired by this single, mysterious captured device. What became of the original fragment? According to declassified archives, it was stored in a steel vault at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base until the 1970s. Portions of it were later transferred to the Smithsonian Institution for study, though most records remain inaccessible. A small shard still exists somewhere in federal storage, quietly humming, its secrets locked away from the world. The story of the weapon Germany captured and could not comprehend serves as a reminder. Wars are not only won by armies or tanks, but by knowledge. And sometimes, the most dangerous power is the one no one fully understands. Even today, engineers studying early electromagnetic propulsion and plasma jets unknowingly trace principles back to that single fragment, a device born in secrecy, recovered from a battlefield, and never fully explained. Dr. Ritter, when interviewed decades later, summarized it best. "We did not build it. We did not understand it. We only witnessed what should not have existed in our time." And in that statement lies the heart of Schwarze Sonne, a weapon, a mystery, a glimpse of a future that the world was not ready to see.